welcome to NTD China News. I'm Karen Chang. Making headlines this Wednesday, April 24th. New reports of violence in China's far western Xinjiang region. The Chinese regime is named as a violator of the freedom of religion at the European Parliament, and new warnings from the World Health Organization as the bird flu spreads outside of China. China's far western Xinjiang region yesterday saw the highest level of violence since the 2009 riots in Urumqi. 21 people were killed and more injured in an attack involving axes, knives and the burning down of a house, according to state media. Chinese media has blamed the violence on terrorists, accusing them of disrupting Xinjiang's peaceful development. China's foreign ministry said today that 15 of those died were police or, quote, community workers. It said the other 6 were thugs, accusing them of planning the violence. Chinese authorities also arrested 8 people at the scene. The Chinese regime regularly blames conflicts in the region to Uyghur terrorists seeking autonomy from Chinese rule. Xinjiang is made up of mostly the Uyghur ethnic group. They have complained that Chinese authorities, who are of the Han ethnicity, discriminate against them. Because of language, religious and cultural differences, some Uyghurs have called for political autonomy. The Chinese regime has been named as one of the top 3 violators of religious freedom, as an NGO released a report at the European Parliament on Tuesday.
Human Rights Without Frontiers, an international NGO based in Brussels, presented its latest report on freedom of religion and belief around the world at the European Parliament on Tuesday.
We identified 2 main groups of countries that don't abide by the international standards of the United Nations. First, the Muslim countries, because they criminalize normal activities related to freedom of religion, the ones that I have just mentioned. Then communist and former communist countries that have put in place systems to control all religious groups.
The report lists 27 countries of particular concern. China was named the 3rd top violator of the Freedom of Religious Association, just behind North Korea and Eritrea. The assessment is based on events in 2012.
All the religious associations are under control of state agencies. Otherwise, if they are not in a state agency, affiliated to a state agency, they are considered in an illegal situation and they are heavily prosecuted.
The report's author and members of the European Parliament both highlighted certain persecuted groups in China.
That we are especially worried, of course, about continuation of repressions, massive repressions against Falun Gong practitioners. It was mentioned in the report that Falun Gong since 1999 has been most massively and cruelly persecuted, and there have been hundreds of thousands of people just imprisoned for their practices.
Vice President of the European Parliament, Laszlo Sotojan, recognizes the same pattern of suppression by the Communist Party as what he witnessed in Hungary.
These totalitarian systems are afraid of any autonomy. A religious body has an autonomous way of thinking. They have their own teaching, own behavior, and they not obey for everything.
The report marks the first international assessment that provides a list of people jailed for their beliefs in 18 countries worldwide.
Concerning China, it's a fact that there has been little progress in the last few years in matters of freedom of religion. And we must also say that we had a list of prisoners. That's useful, that's something that can be used as a tool by NGOs, by the EU, to ask for their release.
The European Union will soon adopt the guidelines on freedom of religion or belief, which will in turn guide its policy towards other countries. The report on Tuesday will facilitate advocacy by NGOs and the EU's external human rights dialogue. NTD News, Brussels, Belgium.
China's deadly bird flu has spread outside of mainland China. Today, Taiwan confirmed a 53-year-old man have tested positive for the H7N9 virus. The man had contracted the virus during a business trip to China. According to Taiwan's Minister of Health, the man did not come into contact with birds or undercooked poultry products while in China. The Taiwanese man had visited Suzhou City in eastern Jiangsu province. He returned to Taiwan via Shanghai on April 9th. Eastern China is where the majority of the bird flu cases have been reported so far. Taiwan's Center for Disease Control said the patient developed symptoms 3 days after returning home. He now has severe pneumonia and has been placed under isolation care. Health experts still don't know exactly where the H7N9 virus is coming from. Some have also raised the possibility that the actual number of people infected is much higher than the reported 109 cases. Those with mild symptoms would not necessarily report their cases, meaning only the most serious one would be diagnosed. And as the bird flu now spreads out of China, the World Health Organization has issued a new assessment of the H7N9 virus, saying it's one of the most lethal flu viruses.
An international team of experts from the World Health Organization has been in China this week investigating the cases of H7N9 bird flu. They say it is proving to be the most lethal flu virus for humans.
There are some other examples of other influenza viruses which are very dangerous for humans. I think the H5N1 bird flu virus is one of the most famous examples of how dangerous an influenza virus can be for people in terms of being lethal. But this is definitely one of the most lethal influenza viruses that we have seen so far.
The World Health Organization says the virus is difficult to track and control due to the lack of any visible signs of illness in the poultry. World Health Organization experts have also said that the new strain is proving easier to contract from birds than the H5N1.
So far, no samples from migratory birds or their habitats have been positive for H7N9. In contrast, samples from chickens, ducks, and pigeons have been positive for H7N9 from poultry markets. Also, environmental samples taken from poultry markets have been positive.
Shandong province reported its first case of bird flu on Tuesday, bringing the total number of confirmed cases to 108. 22 have died from the virus to date. So far, there is no evidence of the virus being transmissible between humans, but experts are still investigating whether the virus could mutate to spread between people.
And still ahead on NTD China News, an impasse between China and India over a border conflict. And a heartwarming story as a beggar gives up his possessions to help those in need. And welcome back. China and India are at an impasse over a border dispute in the Ladakh Desert. The Chinese regime is demanding that India remove certain outposts along the border. India has said no. On April 15th, a few dozen soldiers from the Communist Party's People's Liberation Army set up camp about 6 miles into what India calls its territory. Indian media reported a short scuffle between Chinese and Indian forces. They also said there were incursions by Chinese vehicles, including a helicopter. The Chinese regime said its soldiers had not trespassed into Indian territory and were conducting routine border patrols. India's foreign minister said today that perceptions do vary as to the actual line of control. He also said he was optimistic the dispute could be resolved peacefully, as other border disputes have in the past. The 2,500-mile border between the two countries has never been clearly defined. This has caused frequent conflicts between the two countries, although rarely to such a degree. Chinese authorities have sent in large numbers of soldiers and military police into the quake zone as aid materials continue to arrive. But some residents in one of the hardest hit counties tell NTD they're still waiting to receive aid.
It's been 4 days since a powerful earthquake measuring 6.6 on the Richter scale ravaged China's Sichuan province. According to official numbers, at least 196 are dead, 25 are missing, and more than 14,000 are injured. State-run media has been reporting on the valiant efforts of relief workers, most from the military and the armed police. State-run China Daily says that almost 50,000 tents and 200,000 quilts have arrived at the disaster zones by Wednesday evening. But residents in some areas tell NTD that local officials have prioritized aid distribution for themselves.
With tents, some of the public servants and government units have received them. The public servants basically have food and somewhere to stay, but they haven't distributed anything to the general public.
Baoxing is smaller and more remote than Lushan County, the epicenter of the quake. Almost all the homes here have been destroyed, but help from authorities have been slow in arriving. These pictures posted online show distraught residents overcome with emotions when a group of local reporters arrived on Tuesday.
One of the country's Communist Party secretaries was surrounded by villagers on Tuesday morning because he kept all of the relief materials in one place and didn't distribute it.
Misuse of aid material is something that plagues the Chinese regime. According to a 2009 study by Beijing's Tsinghua University, 80% of money given for relief after the 2008 Sichuan Earthquake ended up as extra revenue for corrupt local governments.
Saturday's quake happened around the same area as a massive tremor 5 years ago. Already more than 4,000 aftershocks have been reported. There are now speculations over whether the quakes occurred naturally or if China's prized Three Gorges Dam played a role.
Geologists are now once again debating whether dam construction in China has led to a proliferation of earthquakes. Sichuan Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources spokesman Fan Xiao told the Global Times, quote, "Large reservoirs built on the fault line can induce earthquakes as the huge amount of water adds huge pressure to the fracture. It's called reservoir-induced seismicity. Although not universally accepted, the idea is that large dams create a water column with enough weight to add extra stress to fault or fracture lines, creating seismic pressure that is eventually released in an earthquake. If the theory of reservoir-induced seismicity does indeed hold water, that could mean big trouble in China. The country already has more dams than the rest of the world put together. According to a 2011 Chinese study, the Three Gorges Dam triggered about 3,000 earthquakes, as well as numerous landslides, representing a 30-fold increase in seismicity. The epicenter of the 2008 Sichuan quake that killed at least 70,000 people was only about 3 miles from the Jipingpu Reservoir. The Jipingpu Reservoir is located on the Longmingshan fault line, the same fault line as last Saturday's Ya'an quake. So can these large dams built on fault lines cause earthquakes? That's a matter that's still being debated. But with deeply rooted Chinese beliefs associating natural disasters with the impending fall of a dynasty, even if it isn't seismic, pressure is building.
And before we go today, an act of kindness amidst the devastating earthquake. This shabbily dressed beggar from Urumqi in the northwestern Xinjiang region is winning the hearts of netizens all over China. That's because on Monday, the man donated all of his earnings from the last 2 months of begging to victims of the Lushan earthquake. In small change, the beggar holding a walking stick put 1,003 yuan towards a donation drive. That's around $160. It may not be much, but the beggar's big heart has touched many in the wake of the disaster. This netizen says, quote, "Great love. There are still genuine feelings in the world. I'm moved to tears." Another said he's the most beautiful beggar. And that's where we will leave it for today's NTD China News. For more of our China content, visit our website at ntd.tv or subscribe to our YouTube channel, NTD on China. Coming up next is a segment of the 9 commentaries on the Communist Party. Stay tuned.